Good morning, Angela.
Morning, Louise.
How are you doing this morning?
Doing very well, thank you. It's lovely and sunny here.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you for joining me. Just to those people who are joining and don't know Angela, and Dr Angela Voss is a senior lecturer at Canterbury Christ Church University. Angela is actually my PhD supervisor, and I was very well guided by you, Angela, throughout the last 3 years. Wouldn't have got here without you, so thank you for that. And so you were the founder and programme director for the MA in Myth, Cosmology and the Sacred at Canterbury Christ Church University, and for many years you were deeply involved in the performance of Renaissance and Baroque music, and then completed an MA in Music Performance Studies at City University in London. You then went on to write a PhD on the astrological music therapy of the Renaissance Magus Marsilio Ficino. And your chief area of interest is the imagination as a path of spiritual or Gnostic knowledge. And you've been deeply immersed in Hermetic, Neoplatonic, and esoteric philosophies and traditions in the West for many years. And you also taught on the MA in Western Esotericism at the University of Exeter, and ran the MA in Cultural Study of Cosmology and Divination at the University of Kent. So, yeah, thank you so much, Angela, for joining me today. And I guess the reason why I wanted to talk to you was because in my own work, I'm looking at the heart as an organ of imaginal perception, a place where we can maybe expand, think more widely about the world in general, the benevolent qualities that the heart carries, like kindness and compassion and love and openness and expansiveness. But also this idea that through a kind of James Hillman archetypal psychology lens, that the heart is an organ of imaginal perception, inspired by the religious philosopher Henry Corbin. And the heart is a place that receives the images of the world. So when the world is talking to us, we receive them initially through the heart, through our imagination, through our deep sensory experience, and this kind of deeper, expansive quality of the world, which is then passed up to the head itself. And so I am seeking out people who sort of think about the world not only in a rational sense, but also marry that with a kind of imaginal turn, imaginative inquiry, and exploring what that might mean to us today in the world that we live in. So these videocasts, these podcasts are called From the Heart. So I guess I'm kind of inviting you, Angela, now to say, well, from the heart and from your own experiences and your own research expertise, how would you look at, in your own terms, in your own narrative, what's currently happening in the world today?
Okay, it's a huge question.
I know.
And no, your work on the heart has been so amazing and has kind of reorientated many people, I think, to think about what learning and particularly academic work means, in a completely different way, using intuitive and imaginative kind of modes. And I guess that's what I've been doing, all my life, is trying to find ways to create this marriage between knowing through a sort of deep intuitive sense and through an imaginative sense, bringing it up through clarity and obviously reason and discrimination and thoughtfulness and all the things that are required to write about it in an effective way. And so I've been thinking about this question of, what do we do now when we're faced with this dilemma? And there are quite a lot of us now wanting to think about this in a different way and find new ways through and to understand it more deeply. And I suppose my heart, it's interesting when you ask me about the heart, because I've always been a very head-based person. I always felt like a very head-based person. I've always felt that how I approach things is very, very intuitive. And I think perhaps what I call intuition, you call the heart. And they're like different modes of or different languages of expressing the same kind of thing. So what I'm saying is extremely heartfelt, but I also feel it's a kind of intuitive sense as well, like it comes up for me. And my heart lies in understanding and clarity, and it lies in kind of finding a way past a kind of ignorant, non-thinking, sheep-following kind of attitude towards taking responsibility ourselves for something that we can really change on a deep level. So I was thinking about this question in terms of what one of my favourite writers, Jeffrey Kripal, calls the three classrooms, which I don't know whether you've mentioned before or had mentioned before, in his book Comparing Religions and The Serpent's Gift, which I think is a very useful framework and metaphor to just see the different attitudes and the different ways people are approaching this and how we might move forward a bit. So what he calls the first classroom would be a place where people have absolute faith in something beyond themselves without questioning and take it for granted. So like absolute faith, say, in an omnipotent God who's sending this pestilence for, to teach us something, and we miserable sinners have to just accept this and learn to be better people. And I'm sure there's a lot of religious communities who are still thinking like that. I mean, it's a very sort of medieval way of understanding, but then of course the medieval folk would have been living in constant fear of death, and it would have been there all the time for them, and it would have just been in their bones, that this was all about the judgment of God, and that's a very first classroom. But I think we see that not only in perhaps some kind of religious attitudes, but also in this complete faith in science, that science will save us and that's it, and we don't have to do anything. Science will have all the answers, and we just believe in it and lead our lives, and then we can get back to normal because they will save us through the vaccines, or they'll save us through the measures that they're taking, and we just have to conform. And I think that's probably an attitude that many people have, and it doesn't involve much deep thinking about it. It doesn't involve much sort of confrontation of one's own inner stuff, as it were. It's sort of following the crowd. And then what he would call the second classroom would be a more, I don't know, perhaps informed, intellectual, deeply knowledgeable scientific perspective, where which obviously is incredibly valuable, and I'm not devaluing this in the slightest, where scientists are working to really help us in terms of our health and in terms of learning how to overcome diseases and finding ways where we can all live much better lives and healthier lives and longer lives. But again, it does involve an understanding that the rational mind through science is the master. It does involve an understanding that anything else is woo-woo, that alternative methods, holistic methods aren't really going to cut it. They're not going to, they can't do what science can do. And I think I've noticed that quite a lot, just now, where, well, I personally have suffered from this, and that I can no longer go to acupuncture, I can no longer go to cranial sacral therapy, I can no longer go to massage, all the things that were helping me incredibly last year when I wasn't well, are just no longer available to people. And now we're having to do social distancing because we're being told that that's the right way to behave. Can't hug each other, all these sort of holistic human activities in the name of science and rational thinking around the virus are dominating. And I'm not sure that that's the right answer either. I mean, I'm not a scientist, so I can't speak from that, but on a human and heartfelt level, I just don't think I can't see how this could possibly be the answer, because the whole being and what is beyond the being is not being taken into account. It is simply the limits of what the rational mind can work with that is being understood and worked. And so that is a kind of second classroom. So this movement into a third space, which I guess is what you might call a heart space, where we have a sense that yes, maybe there is a larger purpose at work. you might want to call God or universal mind, or some kind of greater purpose that lies behind and beyond us all, is somehow involved in the physical manifestation of something that we call a virus or a disease. I mean, what is a virus? For goodness sake, I mean, who knows? It could have been called a demon perhaps several hundred years ago. You know, how do we know what this thing is? And there is something that we need to understand about what's happening to us through submitting to this bigger picture. So that's not actually being in the classroom of faith, because it's not giving up an individual sense of that we've got the potential to change our consciousness and change our way of thinking. But it's a kind of understanding that there's something at root that we don't know, and is totally mysterious and totally ineffable, and can probably only be approached through seeing what's going on in a more symbolic sense.
Yeah.
So as an astrologer, I would immediately have a look at the symbolism of what's been happening this year, particularly in January when things began to start, with the symbolism of Saturn and Pluto being conjunct, which for someone who doesn't speak that language, it's a symbolic way of describing how a very deep principle for transformation that we're being asked to go through is being met with resistance, and is being met with quite draconian measures of rules and regulations, and ways of trying to put it in a little box, or to try and to, you know, give some kind of law and order around it. But Pluto doesn't work like that. You know, it will not be contained, and it will not be neatly parceled up. And so, you know, any astrologer will say, well, actually, we are being asked to undergo a transformation that is beyond our control, because Saturn is about control, and Pluto will blow apart any attempts for humans to control in that way. So I'm rabbiting on. Do you want me to?
No, this is fantastic. Please carry on. Yes, it's so interesting.
So I think part of this third way is to start looking symbolically, is to start realizing that actually people who view the world holistically and symbolically, like astrologers, like all kinds of alternative practitioners and diviners, are actually seeing into a place that the other two classrooms do not see, maybe cannot see, maybe don't want to see. But if they don't, you know, we're actually just going to be stuck, just keep being stuck in this position of, well, what is normality, and try to get back to something that we're not meant to be getting back to, because we're meant to be, I think the human race is meant to be undergoing a massive shift in perception. And it is all to do with what Ian McGilchrist would call moving into a right brain way of understanding this, everything as this massive kind of push towards seeing the world much more as a kind of a showing than as something to fight. It's showing us something about ourselves. And that's where I think freedom from the paranoia and the fear can start coming, because if you're stuck in a place where you're just being told that so many thousands of people are dying every day and you've got to keep 6 feet apart from everybody all the time, otherwise it might happen to you. You're just living in a kind of completely powerless, dehumanized state of being, which I don't think is the way forward at all. But if you understand that actually it's not about that, it's actually about changing our relationship to the natural world, to human emotion, to kind of raising awareness that the human race has been slowly, or maybe quite fast, you know, in the 20th and 21st centuries, going down a route of dehumanization
Yeah.
in terms of materialistic values, and that we can all start changing our attitudes towards that. I mean, I haven't missed going to a shop for a month, or I just absolutely loved it. You know,
Yeah.
it's just the feeling of freedom of just being in nature and being able to get on with my work, and you know, without any of that pressure that's time. If we all had that, more of that, just to be creative and to be with ourselves, and taking that as a kind of positive way of learning more. And I think this is where the internet comes in too, that suddenly all these wonderful courses are sprouting out, people, you know, thousands of people can join in yoga classes. You know, there's a kind of, much as I have reservations about technology, I have to see that it's transforming people's ability to reach out and learn new things. So yeah, I think it's an opportunity to start viewing ourselves differently.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Angela, for that really considered response. And as you were talking, there were so many things kind of firing off in my own mind, you know, and we're talking here about, you know, seeing symbolic language, which is deeply powerful and very supportive when we are faced with situations such as this, where you're putting things in a sort of astrological terms, because that's a symbolic language, which is very helpful in helping us to navigate life. In my own world, when I think about these things, I'm sort of thinking about Goethean inquiry and the heart sense. So making sense of what's happening through the 3-year conversation that I had with my own heart. So I'm thinking symbolically, when you talk about, you know, this is a moment of transformation, I sort of thought immediately about the moment of transformation that happened at the time of the Enlightenment, and the corresponding symbolic image of the heart that came out at that time by William Harvey in 1628, when he saw the heart as divided. And James Hillman says, you know, this heart that he saw was divided against itself. So it had been sealed into the body, no longer able to mediate between the physical world and the world of the divine, as in the medieval period. And it was sealed inside the body, and it was sort of shown as having two sides, a left and a right side, with a septum cordis, the kind of wall, if you like, down the middle of it. And actually that is such an amazing metaphor and symbol for then the split in thinking that kind of happened at that time in philosophy. And then really now what we have is something else emerging. So the heart seems to be speaking. I have a real sense, and it has done through me, in terms of what's now happening in cardiology. And in the early 2000s, there was a Portuguese cardiologist, he's now unfortunately passed away, Francisco Torrent Wasp, and he actually performed a hand dissection of, I think it was a calf's heart. And that heart he unraveled as a Gordian knot. And the difference in the imagery of both of those things shows that on the one hand, you've got a division, right and left sides of the heart, which then led into a deeper philosophy about how we look at the world, and then divide ourselves into either or ways of thinking. But now we have this emerging idea of the heart being a spiral. And these ideas aren't new either, Angela. I think, you know, we talk about this a lot, don't we? These ideas that go back 2,000 years, where anatomists of the day actually thought that the heart itself was structured as a spiral anyway. But the way that we're now seeing this particular heart in our own imagery is that, well, what are the philosophical implications of us now seeing the heart as a spiral, as a vortex, as not divided, as not being in that either or space? And it brings me right back to what you were talking about Jeff Kripal. And he's talking about, you know, the two classrooms, faith and doubt, and then this other place, this sort of place of both and more. And the spiral action of the heart if you think of a spiral, it moves from side to side. So you can bring in these two sides, like Ian McGilchrist talks about his, left and right brain hemisphere needing to work together to create something more. You have the symbolic heart here as a spiral moving between, different sides of the heart, sides, but also not sides, because it's a spiral. And I'm hearing in every language that there is this bringing together these opposing sides that were, bringing them together, but creating so much more out of that. So that would be my language and my take on what's happening now. And also because the heart stands as a sort of symbol with its benevolent qualities like kindness and compassion and openness and expansiveness and respect towards another, that's really what we need in order to try and bring these opposites together. And again, it reminds me of Carl Jung, who talks so much about, the tension of opposites, and the way forward for mankind is to bring these together in a kind of mindful and heartful, wise way. Yeah.
Well, I guess it's back to situating the whole thing in a bigger picture, isn't it?
Yeah,
whether that's
exactly.
a Jungian picture, whether it's a Neoplatonic picture, philosophical picture, but it's standing outside our little selves.
Yeah.
Which of course is, extremely difficult. And if you've got relatives or friends who are suffering from this, or it's not easy to get out of the fury or the anger or the frustration and all those human emotions around it. But yes, to sort of follow this winding path that actually to be stuck in either this or it's that, And when I something that just struck me, in terms of the images we've been shown on the news and things about this, when you see the hospitals they're building, and these hospitals are just rows upon rows upon rows of beds in cubicles with equipment, thinking, well, how can someone really heal when they're stuck in an environment like that, which is literally saving their physical body, but where it's completely divorced from what actually would be considered a healing process, say in the ancient world, or in various sort of holistic ways of viewing the body and the mind. It's like it's become bifurcated completely from other aspects of health which are vital in order to have a sort of whole healing. So thousands of people's bodies may be being healed by this method, but are we actually any nearer to creating a holistic understanding of a mind-body connection, mind-body spiritual connection? I can't see it really, so there has to be a healing of that split. And the New Age talks about consciousness raising, and everyone sort of bandies this around, but what this really means in terms of a change in human behavior also means having to go through a sort of dark night of the soul. It also means actually having to confront darkness, not just outside us but inside us. And again, I think there tends to be this sort of feeling around, well, we just need to exterminate it, we just need to eliminate it, we just need to kill the virus, we just need to, this horrific idea of mass vaccination everyone has to do in order for this just to go, is completely denying, this more united perspective, where actually if we go into ourselves deeply and see what we've created in terms of the destruction of the world as a human race, and take responsibility for that and start healing that in ourselves, and that we may actually have to go through a period of deep hardship in order for this to right itself, and that there can no longer be this huge rift between poor and rich, which has just been getting more and more extreme. And I mean, I suppose as a Neoplatonist, I feel quite an affinity with Neoplatonic thinking, which some people may not understand or be aware of, but it's very much a kind of, it's very much a sort of understanding that we're all part of a hierarchy. You know, we're all part of a kind of, a hierarchy might sound a little bit authoritarian, but it's not really meant to be. It's more like we're all part of an emanation of something much greater than ourselves, and that we're all here in order to work our way, or to understand what it means to emanate back to where we came from, in a way. But that actually involves finding a kind of way of knowing which goes beyond the material way of knowing, and has a recognition that there is this other beyond us that we simply cannot know through material means or rational means.
Yeah.
And if this virus is somehow reduced to a purely kind of rational thing that can be understood and eliminated, then I think we're in for a lot of trouble. But I think if it can be seen as a material, if it can be seen as a kind of a sign or a symbol, a wake-up call, then possibly that we can change, and there'll be enough people who can recognise that, to start waking other people up and creating some kind of new world or new society. That's how I think I would have to see it.
Definitely. I mean, I think I totally agree with you. I think as you were talking, it was like, well, yes, there is a virus, but there's also so much more. There is something that we can, if we're willing to do this, to step, deeper into something more expansive, and maybe to learn from the symbolic nature of what's happening. And I think what really saddens me is just how clinical we've become, and particularly illuminated in what's been happening in the last 6 weeks. That, yes, I think, people are quite rightly worried, and I've been worried too. But I think the frameworks that I have, and I've been talking to other people in the frameworks that they have, like Mary Atwood, for example, through her Renaissance art, the frameworks that you have, that you've been talking about and sharing today, they offer us something more, and enable us to be more than a material being. They enable us to go into a more expanded space that could help us to make meaning and make sense of what might be happening to us. And in so doing, you are able to become able to bring in more parts of yourself that maybe you've kind of hidden or cut away.
Meaning making is healing, isn't it?
Yes.
And creating narratives, creating meaningful narratives is a healing process.
Exactly.
Creating stories, poems, creating artwork. These are all healing processes.
They are.
And then the dominance of science and technology is extremely useful. I mean, it's amazing. I'm not sort of belittling it. If it's not in the service of these deeper healing ways that human beings can be, then what are we all going to become?
Exactly. And I've had these conversations again over the past few weeks, is that the scientific method is deeply important. Without it, I wouldn't be here today. And without it, many people who've been suffering throughout this coronavirus wouldn't be here today. But that's not to say that these other ways of knowing, these ways of turning imaginally into a sort of deeper sense of who we are as human beings, has gone away or is less valuable. If we're making sense through the frameworks that we're talking about, particularly Angela, why, and they're helping us and supporting us to heal, why should that make them less valuable? And I think that's the question that I carry, because they're valuable in my world, and just because we're told that they're not by someone outside of ourselves, that doesn't make it right.
Absolutely, and I think we've all got to start taking responsibility for what we know is true, what we actually
Yeah.
know is true. You know, we all have this thing called a sixth sense, right, which is drummed out of most people in primary school, where we know that we're part of something bigger, where we know that the world isn't actually as it seems to be, that actually extraordinary things happen, miraculous things happen, things we might call, you know, paranormal things happen, that the world does actually act in ways that go completely beyond how we can rationally understand them. We know how extraordinary things happen, like, you know, you pick up a book and it has something, you read something which changes your life forever or something, you know, things like this go on, which shows that the world is not actually run by strictly rational, scientifically measurable methods, and yet we're told it is, or that's the message that we're given. So yeah, I mean, I just think the more that we can open up that imaginative sense of creating meaning that goes far beyond symptom,
Yeah.
And speaks very, very deeply to us individually. I mean, if someone has a passion for a particular kind of music or art, or, you know, starts creating a sculpture or something, it can just completely transform your, I mean, just on just a small level, it can just transform your day or your week. But we're not, no, we don't celebrate that. We just celebrate how many people have died in a particular day in a particular country. The item's all about that.
And it is tragic, you know, that, you know, these figures, they are tragic, but also at the same time, you and I have both been through great difficulty in terms of our own health. And it has particularly worked for me, has been this more expansive sense of that there's something else, there's something trying to tell me something, and I've made deeper meaning of what was happening to me, and as a result I'm sort of feeling so much better than I ever have done, and that's through a more expansive lens and bringing in deeper ways of knowing that make sense to me. And I know that you've done similar, and why should that be vilified or told that it's not valuable by people external to us? And again, it's like you say, it's that transformative process and taking our agency back, taking that sense of empowerment back, that maybe this kind of anorexic view that particularly I was educated to understand is not helpful for not only my own health and my well-being, but also for many people across the planet, most people across the planet, and the planet herself.
Well, I mean, fear and anxiety are things that really lower the immune system. So it stands to reason that the more human we are, you know, the more immune we're going to be to whatever it is that comes along and wants to, as I say, attack us. I don't really see it like that. It's more wants to give us a big shove into some different way of seeing. And I think we're in a very, very difficult position now, because I think we're given a sort of moral message that we have to not be together as human beings, but our hearts are all now, you know, yearning to be together as human beings. And we're going to have to find a way, you know, to create a new way forwards where something can break through, you know, and something can change, and that we're not just going to be dominated by rules and regulations which seem to completely deny humanity, but neither, obviously, do we want to do anything that is genuinely endangering people's health. So I think finding that balance is going to be, you know, in the weeks and months ahead, it's going to be the biggest challenge of all. And I think people have to decide for themselves really what their own well-being needs and requires, and trusting that that is actually what's needed at that moment.
Yeah,
I think we have to take responsibility for our own hearts, as you say.
I think this is the world of the third classroom, isn't it? Us finding a way, our own language, our own way through. That the heart I see also as the third classroom as well, in a way. It's the kind of repository. It's the crucible of that space where we sit in our centre and move between the rational, the imaginal, and bring them together in a kind of discerning way.
And I think people who are involved in the arts too, I mean, the more they can offer through even online, just the more they can offer people nourishment of their soul in that way, I think is going to be really, really important.
Yeah.
And I've just found, personally, just reconnecting with music in the past week or so, and I haven't really been able to listen to music for a year because of my sort of health condition, and just reconnecting with music and realizing, wow, what an incredible force for going straight to the heart and completely regenerating oneself, and kind of going so much deeper than all the sort of the fears and the anxieties and the tensions that are on the surface so much of the time at the moment. And listening to a piece of music you love, and immediately you're taken to a place of very, very deep healing. And I think the more that can be offered to people, the better too. So I think part of our role and our job, as it were, as a sort of collective who are trying to work in this way, is to offer these different ways of being to people, and offer the power of the imagination to people, and help step out of these first two classrooms, which are very, very polarized and very stuck, and into a world of a kind of inner freedom where we can actually make our own decisions about things and how we empower ourselves and nourish ourselves.
Yeah, I love that, Angela. And I just think that's a perfect place to end, really. What a powerful message. And I really look forward to having you back. Yeah, very exciting time. So thank you so much for joining me today. And I look forward to talking to you again, Angela.
Yeah, absolutely.
Keep safe and keep well.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you have any comments, you can add your thoughts below. You might also like to join our mailing list. Please visit us at www.heartsenseresearch.co.uk to subscribe and to keep up to date with our work. On our website, you will also find lots of other resources, including research papers, lectures, blogs, and details of further training and events. If you are inspired by our work or share our passion about bringing heart-centred approaches and awareness into the conversation at the level in our society at which important decisions are made, please do consider making a donation via our Just Giving page. The link is available on our website or below on this channel. All donations help us to continue our important work by taking seriously the wisdom and the guidance of the heart, and working to give the heart a platform to speak in relation to key issues facing our world today. Thank you so much for your support, and we look forward to reconnecting with you soon.